After the business owners rejected his initial offer, Nathanial Cole did not retreat. Instead, he sharpened his focus and deepened his understanding of the situation. The failure to secure any of the properties only propelled him to refine his strategy. He began a more methodical approach to studying the businesses, analyzing their financial structures and market positions. He spent time with customers, gathering insights into their spending habits and preferences, and he interviewed the employees to better understand their loyalty to the establishments. Nathanial also consulted with architects, engineers, and other developers to assess the feasibility of his plans. He understood the need to present a compelling vision, one that demonstrated the long-term benefits of his project, not only for the city but for the businesses as well. By the time he returned to the business owners with a revised offer, he had thoroughly evaluated every aspect of the block and its potential. He now had a refined proposal, a partnership model. His offer went beyond simple property acquisition. Nathanial extended the opportunity for the current owners to remain a part of the new development in some form. In exchange for selling their properties, they would be offered a stake in the new venture. Each would have the option to lease spaces within his new buildings at discounted rates, alongside a share of the profits from the revitalized area. This new proposal was a more strategic approach, designed to alleviate the concerns of the business owners. It acknowledged their fears of displacement and gave them a way to participate in the future success of the project. However, the owners remained resolute in their opposition. Despite the more attractive financial structure, they found the terms insufficient to convince them to sell. They saw Nathanial's approach not as a partnership, but as a veiled attempt at gentrification. The idea of an outsider coming in, changing the nature of the block, and profiting from its legacy felt like an infringement on their hard-earned success. The owners' distrust grew. They viewed Nathanial not as a visionary, but as an opportunist looking to capitalize on the history they had built. Each of his attempts at persuasion was met with rejection, and each rejection felt like another barrier in his path. For Nathanial, the rejections were not only a professional challenge, but a personal one. His strategy had been well thought out, and yet the stubbornness of the business owners left him frustrated. Rather than retreating, he adjusted his approach once more. He was now more determined than ever to find a solution that would allow him to move forward with his plans. Over the course of the next few weeks, Nathanial continued to observe the businesses from a distance, gathering even more detailed information about their operations. He understood their resistance, but he also saw the cracks in their business models, the decline in foot traffic, the aging infrastructure, and the inability to adapt to changing market conditions. Nathanial's vision for the area was clear: a modern, vibrant community that could attract the wealthier demographic needed to fuel further growth. The businesses on the block, however, were no longer part of that vision. Nathanial had come to realize that the owners were not merely clinging to their shops, but were also clinging to an identity that no longer aligned with the future of the city. He needed to find a way to move past their resistance. At this point, Nathanial's thinking evolved. If the individual business owners would not sell, he could shift his focus to acquiring the entire block. In doing so, he would gain control of both the properties and the land beneath them. This would give him the authority to reshape the area on his terms, regardless of the individual objections. He could bypass the need to negotiate with each business owner and instead focus on securing the rights to the whole block, positioning himself as the owner of not just the buildings, but the future of the neighborhood itself. This shift in approach marked a more radical plan. By buying up the entire block, Nathanial could sidestep the challenges of individual negotiations and secure the development rights that he believed were essential for the area's revitalization. He saw it as an opportunity to not only execute his vision, but to control the entire landscape of the neighborhood. This was no longer about simply buying properties for development. It was about consolidating power and influence in one move. But the financial reality of this plan was not lost on him. To buy the entire block outright would require a substantial investment, one far greater than he had initially anticipated. Nathanial had always been resourceful when it came to financing his projects, But the scale of this new plan was on an entirely different level. The cost of acquiring every property on the block, along with the associated legal and financial considerations, could push the limits of his available resources. Despite these challenges, Nathanial remained undeterred. He had come too far to back down now. The potential payoff was clear. Full control of the block would allow him to reshape it in line with his vision, and the surrounding area would follow suit. He began to explore different avenues for financing the purchase, considering private investors, partnerships, and even loans to cover the hefty price tag. Nathaniel's resolve was unshaken. If he could not convince the business owners to sell individually, he would buy the entire block, consolidating everything into one deal. In his mind, this approach would not only silence the opposition, but also demonstrate his unwavering commitment to his vision for the neighborhood's future. As he moved forward, he knew that the real question now was not whether he could acquire the block, but whether he could secure the necessary funds to execute the plan he had set in motion. Nathanial Cole's strategy was clear and aggressive. His decision to purchase the entire block was not only an economic maneuver, but also a direct challenge to the long-standing business owners. He understood that with full ownership, he could dictate the future of the area. The individual businesses would no longer control the block. Instead, the entire property would fall under his influence, enabling him to transform it into a modern development in line with his vision. With this clear course of action, Nathaniel knew the stakes were high. The local business owners, having already rejected his previous proposals, would now view his bold move as a threat to their livelihoods. Their attachment to the block was not just financial but emotional, tied to years of history, community, and identity. The idea that one individual could come in and disrupt this long-established order was unacceptable to them. The local business owners, determined to resist, began working together to form a united front against Nathaniel's plans. They believed their collective voice would be louder than Nathaniel's influence and resources. At the same time, Nathaniel's move had drawn the attention of local government officials and the city council. Some members saw the potential for increased property values and higher tax revenues from the new development. Others, however, raised concerns about the future of the businesses that had been pillars of the community for decades. Would the revitalization be an improvement for everyone, or would it result in the displacement of those who had made the neighborhood their home? The debate surrounding Nathaniel's plan grew, but he remained resolute. He believed his vision for the area would bring about long-term prosperity, and the financial benefits would extend beyond just his company. As the day approached when Nathaniel would make his final offer, both sides were preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Nathaniel arranged a private meeting with the business owners. It would be the last opportunity for them to reconsider their position before he took the drastic step of buying the entire block. His message was simple. They could either accept his final offer to sell, or he would proceed with his plans, which included buying all the properties regardless of their response. The meeting was set to be decisive, and Nathaniel came prepared. His revised proposal gave the business owners a choice. They could sell their properties to him, or remain as tenants in the new development. In either case, they would still benefit financially from the new project. He framed it as an opportunity for them to be a part of the future of the area while preserving their businesses in some capacity. However, the business owners, now fully aware of Nathaniel's intentions, were not willing to budge. They saw the offer as a final attempt at manipulation, a means of gaining control over their businesses under the guise of a partnership. In their eyes, Nathaniel had shown his true colors, and no financial incentive would sway them. They accused him of disregarding the history and community spirit that had defined the block for years. His proposal, they argued, was not about revitalization, but about erasing the identity of the area to make way for luxury apartments and high-end retailers that wouldn't reflect the needs of the current residents. Nathaniel countered, reiterating that his development was not meant to erase the community's history, but to build a more prosperous future. He emphasized that the revitalization of the block would not only attract wealthier clientele, but would also create opportunities for local businesses to thrive within a more modern framework. He believed that his vision, with its focus on upscale development, was the best chance for the block to grow and remain relevant in an evolving economy. But as the meeting reached its conclusion, it became clear that the business owners were not willing to compromise. They were firm in their decision to reject his offer. The historic nature of the block and their personal investment in it were too important for them to relinquish control, no matter what benefits Nathanial promised. They viewed his proposal as an ultimatum and refused to allow him to dictate the terms of their future. With the meeting over and no agreement reached, Nathanial was faced with the reality that his vision would not be realized through negotiation. The business owners had rejected his final offer, leaving him with no further options for convincing them to sell. It was a critical juncture in his plan, one that could either derail his ambitions or push him to take more drastic measures. Nathanial was not one to retreat. The rejection of his offer only reinforced his commitment to his plan. If the business owners were not going to sell voluntarily, he would take matters into his own hands. He had the resources to acquire the entire block outright, and despite the owners' objections, that was exactly what he did. He moved forward with the purchase, acquiring all the properties in the area, effectively gaining full control of the block. This decision marked the turning point in the conflict. Nathanial's bold move signaled the end of any remaining negotiation, and from this point forward, the future of the block was in his hands. The business owners, despite their resistance, could do little to stop him. They had fought to maintain control, but Nathanial had proven that his financial power and resolve would ultimately shape the outcome. The transaction was completed, and the block was now fully under Nathanial's ownership. The business owners had lost their battle to preserve the status quo, and they were left to adjust to the reality of the new development. For Nathanial, the completion of the purchase was not the end of the conflict, but the beginning of a new phase in his project. He now had the power to shape the block according to his vision, but the consequences of his actions, both for the community and his relationships with the previous owners, were still unfolding. Following Nathanial's acquisition of the entire block, the response from the community was swift and polarized. With legal control now firmly in his hands, he moved forward with his plans, initiating the demolition of the existing buildings. The old businesses, once pillars of the local economy, were systematically reduced to rubble as construction crews moved in. The shops, which had defined the neighborhood for years, were now being replaced with modern infrastructure, aligned with Nathanial's vision for the area. The business owners, having fought to preserve their operations, were now relegated to tenants in a space they no longer controlled. Many of them had reluctantly signed new lease agreements, unable to withstand the financial pressure. The negotiations that followed the acquisition left them with little leverage. Their livelihoods, once anchored in the very buildings they had owned, were now at the mercy of Nathanial's development. With the destruction of their former spaces, a significant part of their identity and legacy was irreparably altered. Their futures, once secure in the familiar surroundings of the block, now appeared uncertain. Nathanial, undeterred by the backlash, maintained a firm belief that his development was necessary for the future of the neighborhood. His rationale remained rooted in the economic growth that the new development would bring. He envisioned a new Lexington, one that could attract high-income residents and upscale retailers. To him, this revitalization represented progress, a necessary step to modernize the city and provide opportunities for new businesses to flourish. As demolition continued, Nathanial began to outline his broader plans for the block: luxury apartments, high-end retail stores, and a carefully curated selection of businesses designed to appeal to a wealthier demographic. Despite Nathanial's assurances about the long-term benefits, the backlash from the community grew more vocal. Protests, once small and sporadic, began to gain momentum as displaced business owners and their supporters raised their concerns. While some locals embraced the promise of new development, others felt that the community's unique character was being erased. The new development, with its focus on wealthier clientele, was seen by many as an exclusionary transformation. Long-time residents who had supported the block's businesses for decades were apprehensive about being priced out of their own community. The sense of loss extended beyond the physical destruction of buildings. It was a symbolic erosion of a cultural touchstone. The resistance continued to build, with some local organizations even beginning to organize formal protests. They argued that the city's historical identity was being sacrificed for the sake of gentrification. Nathaniel's focus on luxury living and high-end retailers was perceived as catering only to affluent newcomers, further alienating the people who had lived and worked in the neighborhood for years. The protests reflected a broader sentiment. The neighborhood was changing in a way that left many feeling like outsiders in their own community. On the other side of the debate, Nathaniel's supporters believed the development would revitalize the area. They viewed the project as an economic boon, one that would bring jobs, new opportunities, and higher standards of living. The planned upgrades, which would include more modern infrastructure and improved public amenities, were seen as necessary to compete in a rapidly changing urban environment. Proponents pointed to other parts of the city that had undergone similar transformations, where new developments had led to increased property values and a revitalized local economy. Despite the vocal resistance, Nathaniel pressed forward with his development. His confidence remained unshaken, and he continued to work with contractors, architects, and designers to bring his vision to life. He secured additional investors to help fund the project, ensuring that the momentum of the development would not slow down. The construction of the new buildings began, marking the visible shift from the old to the new. As the weeks passed, more of the original block disappeared, replaced by modern structures that aligned with Nathaniel's upscale vision. Yet, the divide in the community grew. The area was now half demolished, with a significant portion of the block still in ruins while the new development began to rise. The transformation was far from complete, and the community's reaction was far from unified. On one side, some saw a gleaming new future for Lexington. On the other, there was the painful reality of what had been lost. The original businesses, once vibrant and essential, were gone, replaced by empty spaces awaiting new tenants. The progress Nathaniel saw as necessary for economic growth felt like the erosion of the very community that had supported the businesses for decades. As the project moved forward, Nathaniel faced increasing pressure from both sides. The community's division threatened to overshadow the potential benefits of the development. The protests grew in size, and the legal and public relations challenges became more complex. The question now was not whether the development would continue. It was whether the community could find a way to reconcile its deep divisions. In the midst of this turmoil, Nathaniel had to confront the broader implications of his vision. Was it possible to create a modernized version of the neighborhood without losing its essential character? Could the community embrace change while preserving the core elements that had made the block unique? The development was still in its early stages, and its eventual success would depend not just on the physical infrastructure, but on the ability to bridge the growing gap between those who saw the new Lexington as a necessity and those who felt it was a betrayal. As the development neared completion, the transformation of the block was undeniable. The old structures, once familiar and integral to the area's identity, had been replaced by sleek modern buildings. The ground floors were now occupied by high-end retail stores, attracting a different clientele, one that appreciated the conveniences of luxury shopping and contemporary design. Above these spaces, luxury apartments with premium amenities offered residents a comfortable and sophisticated living experience. Nathaniel, having envisioned this change from the outset, saw the area as revitalized, modernized, profitable, and ready for the future. From a financial standpoint, the project was a success. New businesses had moved in, and the property values had risen substantially. The area was now a hub for those seeking a more affluent, upscale lifestyle. Nathaniel's vision of creating a space that blended residential and retail was starting to materialize as planned, generating new revenue streams for the city and attracting affluent residents who were eager to be part of the area's revitalization. The new development was quickly filling up with tenants and customers, bringing a fresh vibrancy to the once aging block. However, despite the commercial success, there were undeniable gaps in the community's perception of the transformation. The original businesses, many of which had been family-owned and operated for generations, had been displaced. Although they had been offered relocation options, they no longer carried the same connection to the area. Their departure left a void, and while the new businesses brought in a different kind of consumer, they lacked the familiarity and local character that had previously defined the block. The newcomers, while satisfied with the modern amenities, had no ties to the history that once made the area special. To them, the new development was simply a place to live or shop, not a part of their personal history. Nathanial, in reflecting on the success of the project, began to recognize the cost of the transformation. While the neighborhood was undoubtedly more profitable and appealing to higher-income residents, something intangible had been lost. It was not just about the buildings or the businesses. It was about the legacy of the community, the stories of the people who had worked there for years, and the shared experiences that had defined the area. Those who had been part of the neighborhood for decades no longer felt the same sense of ownership or pride. The culture that had once permeated the block was now absent, replaced by a sanitized, commercialized version of its former self. This realization was a turning point for Nathanial. He had achieved his goal of revitalizing the area, but at what cost? The community he had sought to improve had been changed in ways he hadn't fully anticipated. The displacement of the old businesses had created a sense of loss, and while the new development brought in a different demographic, it lacked the authenticity and rootedness that had once made the block a beloved local landmark. Nathanial began to understand that the value of a place is not only in its physical infrastructure or the money it generates, but in the people who inhabit it, the connections they form, and the shared history that binds them together. Although the area was financially thriving, Nathanial had come to terms with the fact that progress, when imposed without regard for the deeper emotional connections people have to their surroundings, can sometimes lead to unintended consequences. Change, especially when it disrupts the status quo, can create resentment and division, even when it brings economic benefits. In the pursuit of modernization, the essence of the community had been compromised, and the people who had built the area's character felt disconnected from its new incarnation. The project had been a financial success, but Nathanial now saw it through a different lens. He realized that for future projects, his approach would need to account for not just the physical and financial aspects of development, but also the social and cultural dynamics that make a community thrive. While progress was important, it needed to be balanced with respect for the people who had contributed to the neighborhood's identity. True revitalization, he understood, could not simply be measured by new buildings or rising property values. It had to also consider the preservation of the community's spirit. Nathaniel's experience in this project was transformative in itself. The success of the development had not come without its own set of lessons. He had learned that while change was necessary for growth, it had to be managed in a way that preserved the heart of the community. Going forward, Nathanial would strive to ensure that future developments balance the economic potential of new spaces with the social and cultural needs of the existing community. He recognized now that development was not just about physical space. It was about people, history, and the careful integration of new ideas with old values. The resolution of this project was not just the completion of a development, it was a lesson in the complex dynamics of change, progress, and community. Nathanial had achieved his goal, but it had come at a price. The development he had created was a vision brought to life, but in the process he had learned that true success goes beyond profit margins. It involves understanding and preserving the intangible elements that make a place truly meaningful to those who call it home.